Welcome back, everyone, to the Board of Curators meeting. It was great to visit with our students and university leaders during lunch. Thank you to everyone that went up and talked to our students. We've got some great students here on this campus and on all of our campuses, as a matter of fact. I want to give Curator Hobrock the floor for just a minute before we jump into our strategic theme discussion. Curator Hobrock.
Chairman Chapman, thank you very much. After reflecting upon the conversation that the curators had relative to paid time off, in the discussion in its totality, I think it's important as Finance Chairman to reiterate again the comment that Moon and others have made is that we as curators, and particularly me as Finance Chairman, value the hard work and the dedication of all the employees of the university, whether it's exempt staff, non-exempt staff, faculty, teachers. Everybody's a valued part. Within my own organization, I recognize that the single largest asset my organization has, and I think this holds true to the university, are their employees. And we are nothing without the employees that do all the work. And our discussion about paid time off and benefits and salary all comes together as to how do we provide for our current employees and our future employees a total package that attracts them to our university, maintains them within our university, and takes the mission of the university forward in totality. So I don't want anybody to walk out here thinking that any of the curators are down on the employees. That is not what's going on. We have an obligation and a fiduciary obligation to make sure that we're managing all aspects of this university, and we will listen to the staff, we will listen to the input as we come to our final conclusion of what the entire package, and particularly in paid time off, looks like. So I just want to make sure that that everybody's clear on that the employees of this university are the true assets of the university. So, Chairman Chapman, thank you very much for that moment.
Thank you, Curator Hobrock.
And can I say one thing along those lines? One of the statistics that we looked at is that, they're offered 12 days of vacation. On the average, they took 4. Now, to me, that means those folks wanted to go to work. You can take a sick day. Some people I'm going to take a sick day. But only 4 days were taken on average from our staff. So they wanted to be at work. They wanted to get their job done. And we appreciate the staff and all the people that make the university, all these 4 universities and the hospital great. I double down on what he said. Absolutely.
Thank you, Curator Holloway. Dr. Troy.
Just very quickly, I hear the sentiments of your support each time we meet as a group, so thank you for that. And the board also approved through the financial plan either 4 or 5% performance increase for this year. And they've been very clear, we have to pay our people competitive rates because they're doing excellent work. So thank you. Thank you for your support.
Okay, so thank you, everyone. We have the pleasure to have with us for our guest speakers for our strategic theme discussion regarding critical workforce needs and development in Missouri. I'll turn it over to John Middleton to introduce our guest on the topic for today. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Chair. If I could have the slides, please. So as was said, we're going to talk about critical workforce needs and development. And so if we look at what the University of Missouri system does, we have a significant impact on the workforce for the state of Missouri. Nearly 300,000 alumni live and work in Missouri. 1 in 29 Missouri employees are graduates of a system university. And system grads earn about $11,000 a year more than other Missouri university graduates. Our system universities have educated half of all of our undergraduates and more than 60% of our graduate students when we look at Missouri public four-year institutions. But the question is, how can we do more? And so today we've got a panel of experts that are going to speak to us and really focus on critical unmet needs in the state of Missouri, state, private sector, and university efforts to address these needs, and best practices and new approaches the university can use to do more. So each panelist will have about 5 to 7 minutes to present. If you have specific clarifying questions at the end of each presentation, we can deal with that, but we'd prefer to keep all of the questions to the end so that we can keep this moving forward. So our 4 panelists are Dr. Marty Leathers, the Director of the Missouri Office of Workforce Development, Karen Bushman, who's the Vice President of Marketing and Communications for the Missouri Chamber of Commerce, Rob Russell, who's the Director of Labor and Workforce Development, is an Assistant Extension Professor in the Truman School of Public Affairs, and then Dr. Peter Muser, who's the Chancellor's Professor in the Department of Economics and also in the Truman School of Public Affairs. So those are our panelists, and with no further ado, I'll introduce Marty Leathers to give his presentation.
Thanks, John. Thanks, members of the Board of Curators. It's an honor and privilege to be here today to talk a little bit about what we see across Missouri's labor market. The statistics that John put up are very telling about the impact of the University of Missouri system. Our economy thrives thanks to the economic engine we have as part, in part because of the University of Missouri system. So we really appreciate the relationship that we have with the University of Missouri system and all of Missouri's higher education institutions. So just kind of quickly where we are, some fresh data came out last week. I'm sure many of you have read a newspaper or have listened to a podcast. The market continues to be hot, but it's kind of a two-legged story. Any good economist will say on the one hand and on the other hand, right? And so when we look at where we're at in Missouri, we have a super tight labor market. We have a very hot economy, but we also have some headwinds, and it's really hard right now for everyday Missourian to figure out how to pay for gas, how to pay for groceries, how to ensure that they can now keep up with their debt servicing as those increases. So in Missouri, 3.1% unemployment. There's a lot of debate of what full employment is. I tell you from a practical perspective, we've been in full employment a very long time. We only have 56,000 Missourians who are currently filing unemployment claims in the state of Missouri. To give you an idea, it was about 48,000 the week before, the last week in February of 2020, before the pandemic kind of came to Missouri. And we reached as high as 890,000 unemployment claims in late April, early May of 2020. So we're back down to a very normal pattern, a very tight pattern. At the same time, we have 205,000 active job postings across the state of Missouri. Now, these are online job postings. We spider everything in that's posted online. Certainly, we don't know what's posted on a bulletin board, so there's a few more than this. But if you do some quick math, that's 3.72 jobs open for every one Missourian. And so we simply don't have enough people to do the jobs that we need. So we think about that through terms of labor force participation rate and the employment to population ratio. All three of those metrics were well above the national average. And so Missouri has a bit of a tighter economy, tighter labor market than the national government. Also, over the last year, we think about economic recovery. We've recovered about 96% of the jobs that were temporarily displaced due to the pandemic, and we've added 71,800 payroll jobs over the last year. So a little bit about, what does all this mean? We get a report card every month. It's always backward looking. Certainly there's lags in the data, but there's a couple things I like to talk about when I'm asked about what is the health of today's labor market and where do we think it's going to be heading. Four big key areas. The first one really is population dynamics. In Missouri, the last census, we've been able to see a number of things. Our population under the age of 18 reduced by 8.8%. Now, that's still about 43% of our total population. So there's still a lot of individuals in Missouri who are going to hopefully grow up in Missouri and contribute to our economy. But we saw the fastest growth, no surprise, over age 65. About 58% of our population growth over the last decade was in older Missourians over the age of 65. If you think about what that means for the labor force, that means we have fewer people coming into the labor force over the next 10 to 20 years. And we have more people that are going to be leaving the labor force over the next 10 to 20 years. Those create headwinds. All things created equal, the trajectory doesn't look good, so what interventions do we need to do to help more people come to Missouri, work in Missouri, and stay in Missouri? The other big discussion topic is just awareness and access of opportunity. Increasing awareness and access, whether it's a higher education program, an apprenticeship program, working with our high schools to have students understand a career pathway, even if it's not immediately into higher education. Infrastructure is a big talk. Yes, broadband matters, but we think about the systems we have in place to help support individuals who otherwise may not have access to those supports. And so we have to think about, are the systems designed to really meet people where they need to be met and support our citizens, to support our economic growth, or are they actually creating barriers? And then finally, affordability. Affordability is every part of our economy. It does mean affordability to higher education, but it also means affordability for individuals to be able to go to work and take those jobs and support their families. And so it's very hard to go to work. One of the biggest reasons you drop out of work in your first 90 days are because you can't afford to be in work, because your bills at home are too high and you can't afford to drive to work, you can't afford childcare, other things. Opportunities I see on the other side of this, though, are really listed here. This concept of lifelong learning has stuck, and you know this better than I will ever know this, and that's that adults are coming back and incumbent workers are looking at how they skill themselves up. We did see a great trend during the pandemic that people took their time away from work or their time at home, and they accessed coursework either at this institution or even through some sort of open course environment through Coursera or CompTIA or any of these other certification bodies. The idea is that we know education is no longer linear, but it is continuous. The idea is that someone may not decide at 18 it's time to go straight to college, but maybe I go to work for a while or I'm in an apprenticeship program, but then later in life to move up, to grow, I then want to go back and educate myself. And so we also see more people realizing that if you're on the job more than 12 months, if you haven't done anything outside of work to skill yourself up, you're going to be falling behind. So employers are realizing this as well. The other thing is accelerated innovation. We have tons of innovation that's occurring across the state. You know, some of the great things that we see is democratizing learning through virtual education, both at the high school and the post-secondary level, enhanced broadband access, and really at the end of the day, I think thinking about how we help develop programs that support people while they work. And this model of you don't have to go to school and then go to work, but you can work and go to school at the same time because the entire way you conduct your work might be changing. That means talking to employers and thinking about what that 40-hour or 50-hour work week looks like and where do we allow time for development and education. Of course, in Missouri, you guys have done a terrific job in helping us cultivate these niche clusters. We have the Ag Innovation and Supply Chain Innovation System. We have the Life Sciences Corridor. All these things are really putting Missouri on a map and setting us apart in big ways. And we've seen ourselves be stronger before the pandemic, and I think emerging stronger after the pandemic as a result. And then finally, we have a very connected system. And so I think that we are doing a good job, as on my last slide, saying we have to address the system barriers that we have. And in Missouri, we've done a good job to begin to connect those, being operating as one ecosystem instead of a bunch of dead ends. So with that, I know it was a little bit longer than it was supposed to be, but I will stop and yield to Karen.
All right. Thank you for letting me present to you today and share some statistics and priorities from the Missouri Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Many of you are probably aware the Missouri Chamber of Commerce is the lobbying arm for business in the state of Missouri. You may not be familiar with the Missouri Chamber Foundation, through which we run much of our research that supports our advocacy work and our programmatic work. A few years ago, in 2015, we launched our strategic plan, Missouri 2030, and no surprise, the workforce was a big pillar in that strategic plan, and for good reason. In the competition for jobs, and we're competing with every state in the nation, in the world, workforce is going to be our most effective weapon. And businesses are going to locate where they can access a quality workforce. And we want to make sure that Missouri is that place. But we have our work cut out for us. Consider this. 1.6 million Missourians will retire in the next 20 years. They'll be replaced by 1.4 million. That leaves us 200,000 workers short. And that's if we can hold on to all of those workers. What's causing that? COVID had a big impact on our workforce, and we hear a lot of talk about that. But even before, the effect of the baby boomers leaving our workforce and the slow growth in those demographics that are set to replace them, we're causing a strain that we're now feeling in full force. This graph demonstrates the national gap. You can see 55 and older, the growth in those age groups, and then those under 55. So it's a national problem, but the difference in Missouri is that age group 25 to 44. While the U.S. average growth over the last 10 years was 7.5%, Missouri actually lost in that demographic 1.4%. Now the good news is the next 10 years we're projected to be a little bit better. Missouri is projected to grow at 1.7%, behind U.S. growth at 3.9%. Now, all of those counties that you see on that map that are colored will be experiencing growth, and that's a good thing. But what's a bit concerning is that some of the counties, especially some of our larger metros, are not projected to grow. In fact, they will be losing working age population. So that's concerning. Employers face that problem head on. I've been at the Missouri Chamber for 23 years. I'm dating myself by saying that. In the early years, workforce was a concern for our employers, but it was always among 10 other things that was on their minds as far as obstacles to growing their business. In our recent survey that we did in 2022 in January, that has now emerged to workforce being more than 50% of the biggest concerns for growth for employers' business. It eclipses all others. In fact, it's more than all the other concerns combined, which include costs, rising costs, supply chain, political landscape. Workforce is by far the top concern. Part of that survey, we also asked, what is your biggest concern about your available workforce? And it continues to be the soft skills. In 2019, it was 50% said that was their number one concern. It's grown to 61%.
Can I jump in and just ask
Yes.
a quick question? How do you define soft skills in this context?
Soft skills would be showing up on time, teamwork, accountability, being able to communicate effectively.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So, what should we do about it? Bottom line, as this data has demonstrated, we can't afford to squander a single worker in our state by failing to give them the tools they need to reach their greatest potential. We also need to hold on to people that are in our state, and we need to find ways to recruit more people to come to Missouri. Some of the priorities for the Missouri Chamber highlight those things, and I'm proud to say that as I was putting this list together, it struck me, oh, we're working with the Department of Higher Education on that. Oh, we're working with the University of Missouri on that. And so it is a team game. But the first priority I will touch on is that we realized that we needed to end cuts to our greatest economic engine in the state, and that's our higher education institutions and our K through 12 education. So that is a priority of the Missouri Chamber. We have 2.6 million Missourians who do not have post-secondary education. And so upskilling adult workers so that they can meet their potential is another priority of the Missouri Chamber. And I'm proud to say that one piece of legislation called Fast Track, which we worked with the Department of Higher Education on that bill, was renewed last legislative session, and it also now has been enhanced to include apprenticeships. I mentioned that there were a lot of pressures caused by COVID that's adding to our problems, and one big one is access to childcare. We have a research project that we did with the U.S. Chamber. They surveyed Missouri workers, and at least 9% did quit their jobs or passed on taking a new job opportunity because it wouldn't work within their child care needs. So I'm excited to say that in the last legislative session, we were able to secure $20 million that will be used for a grant program for businesses and organizations to pilot child care facilities so that we can try to find a solution to that problem. Promoting hands-on work is a priority of ours. And just really quickly, when I was at the University of Missouri 30 years ago, I learned journalism in the classroom and also by working at KOMU and at the Maneater. 30 years later, my son came to Mizzou, and he learned biochemistry in the classroom, but also working in cornfields at South Farm. The University of Missouri has long had a culture of hands-on work, adding to the educational experience, and we believe in that culture at the Missouri Chamber. We often say the best way to learn about work is by working. And so we've put a lot of investment in internships and apprenticeships. We've developed a web portal that matches employers and interns and apprentices, and we're having good success with that. We're also working to train more than 5,000 apprentices in IT fields through an IT grant that we received, and very pleased to be working with the University Extension on the Recovery-Friendly Workplaces Initiative. Another factor that we're seeing that's impacting our workforce is those displaced workers due to substance use disorder and opioid use disorder. Finally, we spend a lot of time working in schools, trying to tell kids about jobs that are out there and help them dream about what their futures could be. One particular program is Show Me Careers, where we take educators and counselors into manufacturers, IT facilities, ag tech organizations, healthcare organizations, so that they can go back to their schools and tell their students what kind of opportunities are there. We started that program in urban markets in Missouri, and we have extended it to Columbia and Cape Girardeau this year. So hopefully the trickle-down effect of that is reaching into those students that are eventually coming to the university. So those are a few of our priorities. I want to thank the university and Curators for inviting me here today. And lastly, just want to say that the Missouri Chamber stands ready to support you in your work. We believe in what you're doing. We're proud to have you as an asset in the war to build our workforce. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me to speak today. I've been going to be talking to you about some workforce efforts here at the University of Missouri and UM system. And as part of our land grant mission here at the university, we are always looking for opportunities to create and disseminate knowledge through research-based programs that tackle Missouri's grand challenges. And you've heard, I'm sure, Dr. Stewart talk about the grand challenges over the years here. But one of those challenges that we know is an issue is developing Missouri's workforce, and it's a main area of focus for us. And we are looking at ways that we can adjust and do things differently to help meet the ever-changing needs of Missouri's employers. So as we start to talk about this, I'm going to highlight a few programs that we are creating or are moving forward here that really are examples of how we are working to do some things differently and how we're working to tackle some of these workforce issues. So the first one here, I want to talk about some new workforce pathways that have been created across the system institutions. One that particularly excites me is the top efforts there, which are looking at new non-credit certificates and courses that we have launched in a partnership with MU Extension and the College of Engineering, tackling both the digital skills needs that people face with evolving technologies, as well as establishing a clinical engineering program, which is going to be a credit and non-credit program to help expand our biomedical engineering curriculum to enable us to train clinical service engineers to meet the needs at MU Healthcare and other healthcare systems across the state, and really kind of a partnership that looks at how do we do some things differently and how do we bring people in both in credit and non-credit partnerships here. These are funded through MOExcels, which is a grant workforce initiative from the Missouri Department of Higher Education and Workforce Development that really is looking at how do we engage our higher education institutions in order to create new programs and support new programs that support students, that support employers, and that are really focused on what the future looks like here. We also have a number of other initiatives from other system schools that have been funded in this. And one of the outcomes that we're going to be seeing in the next year or so is a center that we're launching that's going to focus on creating a hub for industry-driven certificates and non-credit activities on campus that really kind of meet the immediate needs of workforce and employers and bring the university out to people in some different ways. Next, you heard Karen talk about this briefly, the Recovery-Friendly Workforce Initiative, which is a partnership between MU Extension, the Missouri Chamber of Commerce, Missouri Department of Mental Health, Missouri Rural Health Association, and Missouri Hospital Association that is based upon some research out there looking at the effects of opioids on labor force participation nationally and then at the state of Missouri. And one of the things that the research has found on this is that in the state of Missouri, as of 2015, so a few years ago, but as of that point in time, that we had over 71,000 fewer people in the workforce than would be expected just due to opioid use disorder and the effects of that there. And so this is a program, there are 13 states that are doing this, that we're bringing to Missouri to try and help support employers as they navigate the world where employees are in recovery, to make sure that they understand what recovery looks like using research in that sort of space, but then also can tell employees that they are recovery friendly, and we have the idea then that they can adjust policies and provide supports as necessary for employees in that space. What we've seen across the country, it started in New Hampshire, is a whole lot of positive impacts on businesses and employers by providing that support, and you are developing a lot of employees who are then moving into the workforce and exhibiting loyalty because employers took a chance on them at a time when they were otherwise at their lowest or coming out of some of their lowest points in terms of their life there. We also have a system workforce initiative that came out of the System's 2020 Engagement Week, and it includes representatives from all 4 System schools on here. We've been working on developing projects as a part of that, and 2 of them I want to highlight that are getting close to launching here. One's a multi-generational workforce management education program, which is going to be targeting business owners, HR professionals, and managers, really to kind of help them understand that in a workforce where we have 4, 5, 6 generations in there, how do you manage more effectively in that space so that the expectations of different generations are being met by their employer. The second program that we're working on is creating a manufacturing academy that is going to be an after-school program that really focuses on building awareness of manufacturing careers and helping to then mentor students into those careers amongst middle school age children. So it's a little bit more of a long-term solution, but really kind of starting to think about how do we intentionally work with folks to build awareness of manufacturing as a career option for folks in the state and understand all the many different careers that could be available in manufacturing. As we pivot here, then talk a little bit about what does the future look like? What are some of the things that we are seeing, at least in our work, that we talk about with employers across the state for the future, and what do we see here? And I put up this graphic here. It comes from a report that comes from the Business Higher Education Forum and a company called Burning Glass Technologies. Dr. Leathers talked about uses Burning Glass data in terms of the jobs that are open there. What they do is they scan online job advertisements to figure out what openings look like here. And in this report, they examined 150 million U.S. job openings going back to 2008 to try and identify what are some of the key skills that professionals need as we're going forward here. And they broke them down into 3 different areas here: human skills, digital building blocks, and business enablers. And these include a lot of different things. So human skills are, I like to say, the 4 C's: creativity, critical thinking, collaboration, and communication, amongst others there, which, as you heard Karen talk about, are part of the soft skills that we hear employers talking about. We see digital building blocks, and then technical skills such as programming and software development being key as part of this here, as well as data management, data analysis, and data communication. One of the things the report talks about is that as a key as we are preparing folks for the future then is trying to make sure that people are getting as many of these as possible. You don't necessarily need all 14, but you need as many of these as possible in your pocket there in terms of going into the workforce. But also then making sure that you are trying to teach people and help people get skills in all 3 of those areas, because one of the things that they talk about is within those 3 areas, then if you have skills in all 3 of those areas, you are much more employable, you are much more resilient in the workforce, and you're going to be able to adapt to what the future holds much better than other folks in that sort of space. So finally, what does the future look like here? What are some things that I'm hearing in this space, and what are some keys that we think about? And I like this quote over here. I tell folks, don't pay attention to the 85%. It could be 25%, but the point is that a lot of the jobs that we're going to be doing 10 years from now, 15 years from now, 20 years from now are jobs that we haven't invented yet. And so as we think about that, the trend is that there are a lot of things that we have to prepare people to be nimble for a future, and we have to be prepared to deliver meet their needs at different points in time. And so lifelong learning, skill development is one that Dr. Leathers talked about here, but we also have to be thinking more flexibly in our delivery method. And that can be both in terms of online versus in-person sort of activities. It can be short courses, but it can also be, some people want degrees, right? But other folks might just need a portion of a course here that will enable them to advance in their career to fulfill the needs of employers there. We see nationally an increasing conversation of skill or competency-based credentials, and how do we start to look at that sort of space, that it's not about the time that you spend in a classroom, but it's also about what you can do at the end of that sort of time frame there. We see a lot of conversation about transferable skills and career pathways, and as people are thinking about moving through a lot more different jobs and potentially in very different industries throughout their careers, how do we help them understand what they have learned and taken from their time here at Mizzou or in the System schools, and there are other jobs that could be transferred to other employers. One of the things that I've already done in my syllabi is I include a section on transferable skills, because most of the students I have in my class are not going to work in the field that I'm teaching in there. I understand that. But if I can tell them that out of this class you should be learning critical thinking skills, you should be learning analysis skills, then I hope that they can take that into their professional career, that they can talk about that there. And finally, then thinking about stronger connections between educational institutions and industry. About 5 years ago, I was at a conference where there was a lot of conversation about how higher ed was not responsive enough to industry, and one of the speakers at the end got up and said, that's very true, but we also have to make sure that industry communicates effectively with higher ed about what they need 4, 5, 6 years down the road so that they can create the programs. And that connection where those conversations happen, where there's conversations about what does the future look like, what do you need, and then how can we meet those needs, is a key part of what we are seeing in the workforce space. So, thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm honored to be here to talk before the Board of Curators. I'm going to be talking about much broader issues than have been discussed to this point. I have a fairly simple argument to make, and it will involve the long run and what universities, and the University of Missouri in particular, should be doing over the long run. I'll base this on looking at the last 30 years, and you'll see that the argument is a simple one, but I think that it's the viewpoint that most economists would give. Let's see. It wasn't the right button. Let's try it. There we go. What you see here is a graph that provides information on the earnings for those with a college degree and those with a high school degree. The red being the high school. They're the median earnings, and they've been adjusted for inflation running from 1990 to 2020, so the last 30 years. And you can see the green line above is the college premium. That's the percentage difference or percentage increase that is paid to those who have a college degree relative to a high school degree. You can see that green line, there's some variation in that, but it's trending upwards over that 30-year period pretty clearly. The dotted line is just a smoothed version of that. So you can see that in the 1990s, the average college graduate earned about 45% more than the average high school graduate. By 2020, that number is over 60%. So there's been there's a dramatic difference in the earnings, and there's been a dramatic increase over that last 30 years. And I'm going to argue that that bit of information is critical in understanding what we should think about as the role of the university and what its role should be into the future. The benefits are not only benefits of earnings, but they extend to unemployment. Here we see relative unemployment rates. The green line is recent graduates from college. The blue line is other young workers, people of about the same age. And you can see that college graduates have much lower unemployment rates than similarly aged young workers. If we compare older workers, that is college graduates in general, to all workers, again, we see that all workers, the red line, displays a higher unemployment rate than that for college graduates. So the benefits in the labor market that are experienced by the average college graduate are substantial, both in terms of median earnings and in terms of unemployment rates. For the general public, why college employers, college graduates earn more is an open question. Sometimes it's asserted that employers are irrational in paying more to educated workers, that those educated workers really aren't worth the wages they're paid. And a second claim that's sometimes made is that those who get college degrees would have done just as well if they hadn't attended college, that it's just a selection process. I can say that unequivocally, economists believe that a college education actually does make workers more productive. The evidence over many years of studies suggests not only that more educated workers are more productive, more valuable to employers, but that the college education actually makes a difference, that there's a causal relationship. You had a question or comment?
Yeah, has your data distinguished between a junior college versus a four-year university? I didn't see that distinction.
Sure. No, I haven't really talked about that. There's a literature over the last 40 years that focuses on two-year colleges, and two-year colleges provide a benefit as well. The evidence is unequivocal. It's not the same level of benefit as a four-year degree, but we can say that there are clear benefits of two-year degrees as well. So that graph, one of the notable things was that increase over time. What has caused that growth in the college premium? Most economists say the primary factor is technological change. High skills, the kinds of skills that people with college degrees have become more valuable. Most of those changes are obvious, at least to those of us who've been around a while. Lower level clerical tasks, things like filing clerks, secretaries, various typists and the like don't exist anymore in the labor market. Those are not skills of value. Those essentially workers who used to push paper around basically don't exist anymore. The result of these changes is that the skills of high school graduates have become relatively less valuable. Now, interestingly, there's a set of jobs, unskilled jobs, that have turned out to be harder to replace, even with technological change. So at the very bottom level, the lowest skilled jobs have not been replaced by mechanization, at least not at current wage levels. However, people who previously had middle-level jobs are now competing with them for those jobs, so those wages have not gone up. So what we've seen is the kinds of wages that were paid to people at those middle or lower white-collar jobs, those wages, those opportunities have decreased. The kinds of skills that come with a college degree, the return to those has increased as the demand, as the change in technology has occurred. So what does this say about universities, what they should be doing? Well, I would argue that this tells us that we should recognize that what we have been doing has been working. In the long run, college has proven to be increasingly more valuable, not less. And second, we need to recognize that the university should focus on developing higher level skills. If we downgrade the skills that we're teaching, make them lower level in the interest of making them more practical, we will not be doing our students a favor. The record of the last 30 years tells us that what colleges do is not obsolete. On the contrary, it's becoming more valuable. It's useful to think of colleges as teaching two types or providing two types of training. First of all, there's skills that are of direct use on a job. You think of an engineer, learns things that are clearly valuable to an employer. But there also are skills, very general skills, that the university teaches. I think of my own field, economics. Most of what we teach our students is general. It's how the economy works. It's what I find exciting, but it's not particularly valuable in any one job. That is, an employer isn't going to ask our students to produce the kinds of answers that we ask in our classes. Why do our students do well in the labor market? It's because they've learned general skills. It's because they basically have moved into they've developed skills that allow them to learn what an employer wants them to know. And many of the kinds of training provided by a university are of that sort. We can look, we can see, just like economics, there are many fields where exactly what's taught is not exactly what an employer wants, but those are still valuable. So my bottom line is simply that the universities have been serving a very valuable function. I think the record of growth in the return to a college education is very clear on that front, and that we need to recognize that must be an important part of what we see the university doing into the future. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for each of your presentations. I think we heard a few things there, certainly the value of a college education, but we also learned that there's some things maybe we can take away from this to improve upon what we do, and things like upskilling for adults, working on soft skills. We've got this age gap that we need to deal with, which is the immediate age group right after college graduation, and the fact that we need to forecast and be flexible as an institution when it comes to the skills that are needed for the future. So if you have questions now, I can bring each of the speakers up as needed to answer your questions. So if you've got one for a specific speaker, let me know. If not, I'll try to point the question in the right direction.
Sure, I've got one to get started. Not sure who it should be directed to, but what process do we have in place at the university to make sure that that the courses offered align with our workforce needs?
Good question, Darrell. I'm not sure which of the panelists could answer that, but certainly, anyone
How
want
about
to take a crack at
Dr.
it?
Russell?
In terms of process and everything like that, I will say I'm not intimately involved in that process, but a lot of different programs have ties to, they either have advisory committees, they have groups like that, they have industry advisory committees and other places to help us to build those relationships with employers. And so we see that in a lot of places that's a key part. It's an area where that feedback and that relationship building can occur on a lot of programs there. It's also through, presumably through surveys and things like that that we do of graduates to understand what they need and what they want. And then as you get into the career services space, it's also the work that they are doing with employers who are coming to campus, recruiting students to understand what are they looking for, what are they recruiting on, how have they changed the process, and what are the key things that they are looking at in that sort of space. So.
And how, just a follow-up question, how nimble are we as the economy changes and as the workforce needs change and the university gets that data, how quickly are you saying, well, we need to shut down this program or add this program? How quickly can that happen?
So we certainly do program evaluations. I think part of your question probably relates to disciplines too. So each individual discipline has its own workforce needs, and if we look at those disciplines, they're constantly evaluating what are the skill sets that are needed, what makes somebody valuable in that particular area. But at a higher level, for example, in the last few years, we have gone through a program audit and looked at the number of programs that we have. Are those programs still applicable? Are we training people in those areas? Are graduates getting jobs in those areas? And that's part of an ongoing assessment of our programs that's done through the Provost's office.
Curator Chapman, can I answer as well?
Yes, please.
So like even today, we had, you thankfully approved the Masters in FinTech, Financial Technology. That comes out of our Department of Finance. That department has a whole financial advisory committee made up of financial advisors from all across the different corporations in St. Louis, telling them exactly what we need for our curriculum in that particular department. So it's a very direct exchange. And in addition, I think you heard Dean Phillips talk about the St. Louis 2030 Jobs Plan, and their number one priority and need for the St. Louis region is in FinTech. So again, making sure that all of that is aligned. So it starts with our programming and courses that come out of the advisory committees, and then coming up through the chain here as we make sure we're expanding our programming and then reallocating our resources, frankly, into the areas that have the biggest growth.
Understood. Dr. Troy?
I was just going to mention yesterday when we had the meeting with the chancellors, they talked about the new programs that they developed, but also the programs that were eliminated as part of that program review. And there have been more programs that have been eliminated than those created. And that's something that we're going to have to look at even more closely to make sure that we're providing our students with the best skills that they need. So that's a very good comment from you.
Okay, thank you.
Pre-COVID, and this is probably for Marty, I remember talking about this through the Department of Higher Education and Workforce Development. There was going to be a big emphasis on trying to get the people who hadn't finished their degrees to come back. Can you talk about where that stands? And that's probably relates to more than just Marty, but it feels like we lost steam on that in COVID, and then obviously there's a place where we need to meet them that desire at universities.
You know, absolutely. So we did have some momentum building, but I think I'd push back a little bit on the lost steam part because I think
Okay.
we've recovered quite well.
Good, thank you.
A number of things that we're working with. One, we've created a statewide adult learner network, which includes a lot of the post-secondary institutions in the state of Missouri. And the idea is how do we attract learners who are over the age of 25. We've also tried to define what an adult learner is, and really you can't put a number to it, right? It becomes a construct, and you have to figure that out. But there's a number of things we've done also on the workforce side with the Fast Track program. The Fast Track program did have a struggle for two reasons. One, and we launched it during a pandemic, and two, it did have the barrier of the promissory note. And so now that that has been changed, now that we have a 7-year sunset, I think that program after August is going to be a lot stronger. And then I would say that all of our work with registered apprenticeship and expanding other workforce development or learning opportunities, what we're finding is those individuals are, once they complete those programs, are then going back to then either go to school or finish school. And so this idea of efficacy, right, and confidence of, well, you know, college is for me. I went to high school 15 years ago and it wasn't a good experience. Well, now I've gone through an apprenticeship. Now I have a industry-recognized credential. Now I'm feeling a little bit better about things. I feel a little more confident. So now I'm going to enroll in that community college program or that university program. So we're seeing that direct tie happen, and that's what we mean by lifelong learning, to make that connection. That said, there's a lot more work to do. We look at our prime age employment rates in Missouri. We're about 75% of our prime age, labor force participation rate, I should say, is about 75.6% of prime age employment. Actually, for women, it's now back to pre-pandemic levels. It's about 77%. Men aren't there yet, so women had a later start but bounced back quicker. But we also know that there's this trade-off between work and school, and so how do we measure the ability to serve more people while they're working to also be in school? I think that's a big piece of it.
I've got a question about the data you put up showing the gap between income between high school and college graduates. Is that more of a function of, and I'm just theorizing here, is that more a function of poor high school curriculum not preparing kids for the workforce, or that college is really that valuable? I have plenty of people in my family that I know, generations back where high school was all they needed and they went out and worked. So our high school is just not keeping up to give kids the skills that they need. Is that more of a reflection of that versus college being, adding some tremendous value to the kids?
I would say that the evidence is not that high schools they may be failing relative to what we want them to do, but I don't think there's a secular decline in what they're providing students in general. I think what we're observing is an increased value in the kinds of skills that people get through college. And I think that the evidence is pretty clear on that. In other words, that the kinds of technological change that have occurred have just made those skills that once were sufficient to provide you with a good job no longer sufficient. And so we're talking about changes in the technology, not so much in the kind of training that's provided by high school versus college.
Thank you.
There was a slide up there that talked about the skills that employers needed. They had soft skills and had 3 different sets of skills. And that's what I'm talking about. One of them, the soft skills, was critical thinking. I question how well our universities are teaching critical thinking. And the reason I say that, and I've had a similar conversation, but this one sticks out in my mind because of the way it came down for a young man who just graduated, been with me about 1.5 years, and he walked into my office with a problem and laid it out in front of me, and I was just absolutely frustrated. This young man was bright, this young man was hardworking, and I was frustrated, and I said, "Danny, damn it, didn't they teach you to think in college?" He said, "No, sir. That's why I came to work for you." My point is, I think that we have to put more emphasis on that one soft skill of critical thinking. Of what I've seen of college graduates is that is the one skill that they need work on. They need work on it. So if you want to meet that workforce demand out there, critical thinking is huge.
Good point.
I'll have a follow-up question. I think it may be for Karen. We were talking about lifelong learner, and I apologize if I had it not remembering the right slide deck. So we're trying to figure out how to get these people to go back to school who are interested. Is it an issue that the work needs to allow them the time to do it, or that they need the support to pay for it?
I think it's probably both.
But which side would you lean towards? Because I think that's, we're sitting here talking about benefits today, right? And that's one of the things we have is as tuition for our employees, and obviously waivers and for their families. So trying to figure out how you put together something that's meaningful.
I really do think it is both. And some employers have lifelong learning policy. My employer does, and allows those types of things. But it's just not a culture in some workplaces. So you need to overcome that barrier. We've talked about Fast Track a couple of times already, funding for adult workers in high-demand fields, that they can access that. So, that funding is there, and there's other pots of money that are available for low-income people to access. So I don't know how to answer if it's one or the other, but I recognize your comment.
Thank you.
This may be anecdotal, but I'd like to get your thoughts, if any. We have kids that come out of college now, and you hear these stories in the media that they can't afford to pay back their loans. They've went down a career path that now the investment that they made, they're not seeing the return on their investment. How are we advising? Because that seems to be a failure at the university level. Someone didn't tell them that, hey, what you're studying is not going to result in the kind of returns that you, to pay for the investment you've made. How is that? Is that a problem? Do you see that as a problem on MU's campus? And how do we address that? Because that seems to be, I would hope that the kids that come here are better off when they leave and not worse off.
Yeah, I think one of the things that Vice Provost of Undergraduate Education, Jim Spain, and I talked about a few days ago is we are working on financial competency skills, right? So there's the ability to take out more loans than you need. We've all seen that happen. And how do we advise young people that working within their means, so to speak, to minimize their financial debt so they get the best return on investment of their education? So we're certainly looking at those things. In my own discipline in veterinary medicine, it's huge, what the debt loads can be. And those can be minimized through a number of different things. So one of the things that we work on there too is financial competency, because it's easy to borrow money. It's hard to pay it back.
Dr. Troy?
So at the University of Missouri here in Columbia, the provost office has absorbed experts on financial planning into the financial aid office. So they work with students as they get their financial aid packages to understand what they can afford in loans if they have to take out loans, but also discuss what are the expected incomes in that discipline if they choose to go into that discipline, so that they make a conscious decision. And I believe, I'm going to look at the chancellors, that they do that at their universities as well. But the more that we can do in financial literacy, financial planning, I think that best serves the students. So I agree with that approach.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Any questions, further questions from the curators? Go ahead. Yes, Dr. Troy.
So my question is for Professor Muser. Professor Muser, you've shown that, in general, college education provides a premium, but that's looking at higher education overall. Are there metrics that can evaluate which universities are doing that better than others?
It's much harder to evaluate a particular university on that measure. And the similarities from one university to another are much greater than the differences. So we also have difficulties of identifying differences between field, because each person would have a different alternative if they hadn't gone into that field.
That's right.
So you can't really say someone coming out of an engineering degree and compare them with someone coming out of a very different kind of a degree and assume that they would have made the same if they would have been able to switch with each other.
Right.
So statistically, it's a very difficult thing to do. I can say that they're comparisons of different kinds of schools, which are meaningful, which show that those differences are much smaller than you might imagine. That really what the universities have in common with one another is greater than their differences. And that's one way of saying it.
Thank you.
Any further questions for our panelists? Okay, thank you for that great presentation. We really appreciate it. Okay, as I mentioned earlier today, we sadly lost Remington Williams in a car accident earlier this month. In honor of Remington Williams, I would like to begin with a moment of silence. And please recognize the photo of Remington also up on the projectors. I would now like to take up a board resolution prepared to recognize the commitment of Remington to the students, faculty, and staff and leaders of all of the university campuses. I want to share a few statements from the resolution for everyone here today. Quote, Remington was an upbeat and caring individual, a great listener, and always looked for ways to help others. Remington was committed and involved while working with the board and developed a working relationship with the curators that made him effective in representing student interests. He was actively engaged with the students at each of our 4 universities and worked to amplify their successes, promote their stories, and ensure that their concerns were heard. As chair of the Intercampus Student Council, Remington was the driving force behind the first ever joint meeting of the council and intercampus faculty cabinet, which opened a world of new possibilities and opportunities for collaboration between students and faculty leaders. May I now have a motion and a second from the board to approve the resolution recognizing Remington Williams for his service as student representative to the Board of Curators?
So moved.
Second.
Is there any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Do we have any abstentions? Okay, the motion carries.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to reflect that the vote was unanimous.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Curator Holbrook. I'd like to open the floor for any curators of the UM or UM system administrators who would like to say a few words. Well, I'll start off by saying that I really miss Remington. He was a fantastic young man. We talked about soft skills today, and I thought about Remington because he had soft skills. He could talk to anybody. He was courteous. He was conscientious. He was empathetic. He listened. He talked. He asked great questions. Everything you'd want to see in a young person today. So I will miss him. This board will miss him. I know his family dearly misses him. And the world is worse off without Remington Williams in it. He was truly a fantastic human being, and I wish his family the best.
I will say that I knew Remington in high school. He's in my daughter's high school class. And he stood out in a unique way, even for an adult watching the high school kids, and was always kind of teasing the other kids in a good-natured way on his teams and all. And he was special, and what I'll miss the most is already I thought it's going to be fun to watch Remington's career. And we won't have that opportunity, and I know he has a wonderful father and a wonderful mother that I've known for several years, and I think we all feel for him.
Thank you, Curator Graves. Anyone else?
I'd like to say that when I first met Remington, he's just such a fine listener, and he made you feel like that you were an important person. And that's a skill that's learned, and it comes from inside. And he had it at a very young age. Many times it takes a while to develop that. He was such a sincere person. And when he came to all our meetings, I don't know that he was ever missed a meeting. And when you talk to him, he was so prepared. He had made the rounds. He was interested in each campus, and he was truly an advocate, okay, for the students on each campus. It was amazing. When I first met him, especially the second time I was around him, I had to go home and talk to my wife about him because he was an impressive young man. And we're all going to miss him.
Thank you, Curator Holloway. Anyone else?
I don't know, I guess my perspective on Remington always came from the fact that there was not a stranger in the room when he was there, because he would make it a point to whatever students he brought there or wherever he was, he would make, Michael, have you met this person? They're interested in this. Do you know anybody who? So he was always bringing people together. And I always have this rule, I'm like, hey, if you kids are in town, come over and we'll go, go to happy hour, we'll go grab dinner, you tell me what's going on. I don't think Remington, and he worked in my office for a summer, so I got to see him more. I don't think we ever did a Friday where we said, all right, Friday, we're getting together. He didn't bring 3 or 4 students I had never met. And by the time they left, I knew everything about that person and felt like I'd do anything in the world to help them. That's the kind of person he was, and he was always looking to unite people, bring them together, and get them to, how do you get to your next step? How do you get here? How can I help you? And so I think that's the thing that I'll miss the most just about a young man that he got it. And he, like the story about him writing his handwritten notes. I mean, things of that nature, kids just don't do anymore, and that's just amazing.
Yes. Thank you, Curator Williams. Anyone else?
I'll just say that I really enjoyed Remington. I thought he always had a great perspective on this board, but I was most impressed with the fact that I felt like he had so many leadership skills. He demonstrated those to me and others at such a young age. I mean, he was very talented, and he will be missed.
Thank you, Curator Lehman.
I always think of Remington as the collector. We talked last night about his sports collection, but he collected all these people from all parts of his life. And I think that showed certainly at his services, it showed in the social media and the support. It stood with me as each of our universities did a story about him. They were all able to be personalized, which said something about his interaction with each of our chancellors, with our students there, and his ability to care about them. But like the rest of you, I mean, his family sits heavy in our hearts.
Thank you, Robin. Yep, Dr. Troy?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Chapman. It was really good to see that at his funeral, all members of the Board of Curators, as well as senior leaders at the university, participated and to share memories of Remington with the family, and at the same time, learn more about this young man. As you know, he received his law degree from UMKC, and he was planning to complete his MBA from UMSL. And I think he would have received degrees at all 4 universities, even an engineering degree from S&T. He was a student of life. He was a student of people. And I realized that I missed out by not learning more about him during the time that he interacted with us. He's led a fascinating life, and many people are going to miss him. Those of you who are sitting in the back can't see, but there is a plaque for Remington Williams on the table, and there's an empty seat. And as I shared at his funeral, he will be missed deeply, but he is not going to be forgotten. So thank you, Chair Chapman.
Thank you, Dr. Troy. We'll be working as curators to think of the right way to remember Remington, and we will keep you posted on how that goes. I want to just share something that Remington's mom told me as a father of 3. She just told me, and she was weeping at the time, but she said, love your kids and tell them every day that you love them. Don't let a day go by where you don't tell them that you love them. And just know that every day is precious. And since she's told me that, I have done that, and I make time to do that, and that'll always stick with me. So, anyone else? Okay, everyone, thank you for those kind words. Remington will always be warmly remembered. Now, are there any other items for the good and welfare of the board? If none, I would entertain a motion and a second from the board to move into executive session.
So moved. Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Cindy, please call the roll.
Curator Burnsick?
Yes.
Curator Chapman?
Yes.
Curator Graves?
Yes.
Curator Hobrock?
Yes.
Curator Holloway?
Yes.
Curator Lehman?
Yes.
Curator Winokur?
Yes.
Curator Williams?
Yes.
All votes in favor. All votes in favor.
Okay, thank you, Cindy. Okay. This concludes the public portion of our meeting today. The board thanks everyone for their time and their reports. President Choi and I will be available during the press conference in a few minutes. I've asked Curator Hobrock to join us to add any potential commentary on our new leave plan or proposal. The board will reconvene in executive session at approximately 2 o'clock or before. If we get done with the press conference before, we can get started a little bit early. But at 2 o'clock in North 201 upstairs. That's North 201 upstairs. Thank you, everyone.